Hey there. Tonight, we are settling into a mystery that has kept 1 foot in scripture and 1 foot in shadow for centuries. What did AI find in the Book of Enoch? Recently, researchers fed layered translations of Ethiopic manuscripts, Aramaic fragments, Greek quotations, and later Enochic traditions into advanced language models. Then cross-checked the results with historians of Second Temple Judaism, textual critics, and specialists in ancient calendars. And what the system returned was not a neat little answer, but a darker pattern hiding beneath the familiar story. The machine kept tracing the same buried thread: fallen watchers, forbidden knowledge, a prince behind their rebellion, a human lifted near the throne, and a cosmos arranged like a clock whose doors open with terrible precision. If this kind of quiet descent into ancient darkness helps you rest, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And now, let the room soften around you. Let the candlelight grow low in your mind. Let your jaw unclench. Let your shoulders sink. Breathe in slowly, and breathe out even more slowly. And imagine the sound of parchment being opened in a place where no one speaks above a whisper. The Book of Enoch has always lived in that hush. Not fully inside the canon for most traditions, not fully outside memory either. Always waiting at the edge of accepted history, like a figure standing just beyond the reach of firelight. Honestly, I have always found it strange that some of the most unsettling texts survive this way. Not erased, not embraced, simply left in a kind of twilight. That is where Enoch remained, carried by communities, copied by careful hands, translated across languages, hidden in monasteries, quoted by later writers, doubted by authorities, loved by mystics, studied by scholars, and now, in our age, fed line by line into neural systems that can compare thousands of textual variants without growing tired. That modern effort matters more than it sounds. For generations, scholars read Enoch as a layered work assembled over time, not as a single voice speaking from one historical moment. Parts of it likely took shape between the last centuries before the Common Era and the first centuries after. The real authors did not sign their names. They gave the work to Enoch, the ancient patriarch, who in Genesis is said to have walked with God and then vanished from ordinary human sight. In old literary culture, that was not unusual. A revered ancient name could lend authority to a new revelation. Yet even when historians explain that process, the book retains its power. It still feels as if someone opened a door a little too wide. What startled the new research teams was not merely the old content, but the way repeated phrases aligned across different sections once the text was processed as a network instead of a straight line. The AI models were trained to detect recurrence in vocabulary, narrative structure, and conceptual clusters. Then compare those clusters with other Jewish apocalyptic writings, Adam traditions, later Enoch texts, and fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls. The result was a map of internal echoes. Certain expressions glowed brighter than others, turned away, with their prince, bowed before Enoch, heavenly books, the Son of Man, the doors of the sun. Each phrase seemed to belong not to one isolated scene, but to a hidden architecture beneath the visible story. And the visible story begins in a world that feels biblical, but colder. In the familiar tale of Adam and Eve, sin enters through a garden, a serpent, a forbidden tree. In Enoch, the moral fracture opens somewhere higher, in the heavens themselves. The watchers, angels appointed to observe the world, do not remain at their posts. They look downward. They desire what is human. They descend. The language in some manuscripts is solemn and almost restrained, which somehow makes it more unsettling. No thunderclap announces them. No trumpet warns the earth. They simply choose to step across a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. If you were standing here with me, beside this imagined fire, I would tell you that this is where the whole atmosphere of Enoch changes. Once the watchers descend, the world no longer feels like a quiet field of scriptural history. It feels watched, influenced, altered by beings who should have remained beyond reach. They do not merely take wives from among human women. They bring knowledge with them. Forbidden arts, methods of warfare, metalworking, ornamentation, star lore, enchantments. The old text presents this not as enlightenment, but as contamination. A gift can be a wound if it arrives before its time. The researchers who used AI to compare these passages with parallel traditions found that the lists of forbidden teachings vary across manuscripts, but the pattern remains stable. Knowledge in Enoch is never neutral. It enters the world with weight. It stains what it touches. From these unions come the Nephilim, gigantic offspring who embody excess. In later popular retellings, they become spectacle, almost fantasy. But the older tone is sadder than that. They are not marvels. They are signs that proportion has collapsed. Appetite grows too large. Violence spreads. The earth groans under what has been released into it. Ancient scribes wrote of bloodshed, arrogance, devouring, lawlessness. Modern readers often rush to the giants because giants are easy to imagine. The better scholars, and now the better AI models too, keep returning to the moral machinery underneath. The Nephilim are not just monsters in a tale. They are the outward proof that order has been ruptured by beings who mistook desire for permission. And right in the middle of that disorder stands Enoch himself. Not a warrior, not a king, not even, in the usual sense, a prophet crying in the street. He is a walker between thresholds. The text gives him a role few ancient writings dare to assign so boldly. The fallen watchers ask him to intercede. They bow to him in some traditions. They beg him to carry their plea upward. Imagine that scene carefully, because it is one of the most eerie in the whole collection. Angels, once beings of height and radiance, now imprisoned or trembling, turning toward a human being and asking for help. The hierarchy has folded in on itself. Something in heaven has gone wrong enough that the creatures of light kneel before dust. This was one of the sections where the AI analysis became especially provocative. When the researchers aligned First Enoch with later texts like Second Enoch and Third Enoch, and then compared those with older Adam traditions about angelic obedience, they found a recurring motif that many readers had treated as incidental. Bowing, testing, honoring a human in the heavenly court. In some ancient stories, angels are commanded to honor Adam, and one proud figure refuses. In Enochic literature, imprisoned watchers or heavenly beings bow before Enoch, or before the transformed figure he becomes in later traditions. That repeated motion suggests not a random detail, but a deep inherited idea. Humanity and heaven are entangled more intimately than official doctrine later preferred to admit. Scholars still debate how early all these links are. Some argue later writers layered fresh motifs onto older traditions. Others believe the roots go back much farther, perhaps to early stories of celestial rebellion and human exaltation, circulating long before the texts were written down in the forms we now have. We cannot be sure about every step. That uncertainty matters. It keeps us honest. Yet uncertainty can also deepen the atmosphere. A half-erased path through old snow can be more unsettling than a paved road. You can see that something passed there, even if you cannot name it. The first great portion of Enoch, often called the Book of the Watchers, carries this haunted mood almost from beginning to end. The rebel angels plead for mercy, but mercy does not come in the form they want. Enoch ascends, or is taken, depending on how one reads the scene, and he sees a heavenly court not softened by sentiment. The watchers are judged. Their request is denied. Their names become warnings. They are bound, cast into darkness, sealed until a final reckoning. There is something quietly devastating in that refusal. These beings crossed into humanity, seeking pleasure, power, or curiosity, and in the end, they discover that knowledge does not rescue them. Even proximity to heaven does not protect them from consequence. I think that is one reason the book still unsettles people. It refuses the comforting assumption that understanding always saves. Our age loves decoding. We believe that if we can parse the symbol, map the manuscript, run the algorithm, uncover the hidden layer, we will somehow master the text. Yet Enoch keeps whispering a different possibility. Some truths are not hidden because they are weak. They are hidden because they burn. The AI teams working on the text did not, of course, decode some magical cipher that scholars had wholly missed for 2,000 years. The more responsible researchers are careful about that. What the systems did reveal were patterns of emphasis, structural recurrences, and conceptual bridges between passages that human readers often hold apart. One analyst described it beautifully, saying that the machine did not invent a new book. It simply held the old one under a different kind of light. Under that light, Enoch appears less like a scattered archive of strange visions and more like an intentional corridor. Fallen beings, illicit teaching, human mediation, cosmic judgment, celestial order, final renewal. The themes recur like footsteps in a dark hall. Outside the text, its afterlife has been almost as fascinating as its content. Online, people treat it like a forbidden manual. In films and documentaries, it drifts in as background thunder behind Noah, the flood, the giants, the old world before collapse. In scholarship, it becomes evidence for the richness of Second Temple Judaism and the ideas circulating before the New Testament era. In religious communities, reactions split. Some find it dangerous. Some find it illuminating. Some find it merely interesting. And in Ethiopia, of course, it was never entirely pushed away. There it remained inside a living tradition while other branches set it aside. Why was it set aside almost everywhere else? Partly because of authorship, partly because of its extravagant angelology, partly because church leaders and rabbis alike preferred texts with firmer lines of authority. Once a community decides which books define doctrine, the others become unstable ground. Enoch was too vivid, too speculative, too willing to wander into high chambers and deep prisons. It spoke of giant offspring and heavenly calendars, of cosmic books and fiery judgments, of named angels teaching humanity arts it should not yet know. For those trying to build a stable canon that may have felt less like guidance and more like weather. And still it remained. Quoted in Jude, echoed in themes that later Christians would recognize in Daniel, the Gospels, and Revelation, the Son of Man, books of judgment, thrones of glory, pre-existent heavenly figures. None of this proves a direct line from every Enochic verse to every later doctrine. It does show that Enoch stood near the stream from which later traditions drank. The book is not a stray invention with no relatives. It belongs to a family of ideas that shaped how many ancient people imagined justice, rebellion, holiness, and the end of the age. As the fire settles lower in this room of the mind, I want you to picture an old manuscript table. Dust at the edges. A lamp burning low. Scholars once bent over it with magnifying lenses and dictionaries. Now imagine, beside them, a cool bank of processors humming softly, translating, comparing, clustering, aligning, ancient ink and modern code sharing the same silence. The machine notices that the phrase with their prints returns with suspicious force. It notices that bowing before a human echoes across texts too often to be accidental. It notices that the architecture of the heavens in Enoch is never just scenery. It is always law, always structure, always a warning that even stars keep to their appointed path, while watchers did not. That may be the darkest line hidden in the whole work. The stars obey. The sun keeps its doors. The moon receives and releases light in season. Only moral creatures rebel. That is what makes the fall of the watchers feel so cold. The cosmos itself remains orderly while beings with will fracture themselves against it. And somewhere below, humanity inherits the consequences. In a moment, we will go deeper into the hidden prince, the bowed angels, the strange possibility that Enoch was placed in dialogue with older stories about Adam and Satan. And then, stranger still, we will drift through the heavens with Uriel and look at the doors of the luminaries, where time is measured not by clocks on a wall, but by fire passing through appointed gates. For now, let the old sea of silence close gently over the room. Let the words settle like dust on a shelf. The watchers have already descended. Enoch has already been summoned. And the first dark petition is only just beginning. The deeper researchers went into the Book of Enoch, the more one detail kept returning like a shadow crossing the same doorway. Not merely fallen angels, not merely rebellion, a prince among them, a leading will behind the descent. Recently, teams using language models built for ancient corpora began comparing chapter clusters that most casual readers never place side by side. They ran Ethiopic text against Greek fragments, later Slavonic parallels, Adamic traditions, a rabbinic motif, and the broader field of Jewish apocalyptic writing. What appeared over and over was a quiet but insistent structure. The watchers do not simply drift into error as a crowd. They fall with their prince. That phrase matters. In some translations, it slips by so gently that a tired reader might never pause over it. But once the AI flagged the recurrence, scholars started looking again at how the same wording appears in later sections, where the leader of the rebellious spirits is named more directly. In those lines, the figure, often rendered as Satanael, or a close variant, depending on manuscript history, comes into focus as the head of the apostasy. The startling thing is not that a leader exists. Many old rebellions want a face. The startling thing is how subtly the earlier passages prepare for him. It is almost as though the text enjoys withholding the full outline until the reader has already walked into the chamber. I have always found that old texts rarely hide things by silence alone. More often they hide them by repetition. A word appears once and means little. A second time, it feels familiar. A third time, it begins to vibrate. With their prince, bowed down, turned aside, tried and tested. These expressions weave through Enoch and through neighboring traditions like threads in a carpet only visible when viewed from above. That is exactly the kind of work modern AI excels at. A human scholar senses atmosphere. A machine can count recurrence without fatigue. Put the two together, and the buried pattern starts to breathe. The pattern becomes stranger when we turn to the scenes of angelic bowing. In some of the most eerie moments of Enochic literature, celestial beings bow before Enoch himself, or before the elevated figure he becomes in later mystical traditions. At first glance, this can seem merely dramatic, an image of cosmic hierarchy turned upside down to emphasize Enoch's favor. Yet the cross-textual analysis suggests something more deliberate. The bowing scenes mirror older stories in which angels are commanded to honor Adam, and one proud rebel refuses. In those tales, refusal becomes the seed of demonic revolt. In Enochic developments, the inverse appears. Certain angels do bow. They submit. They acknowledge the human raised into the court above. The old refusal and the new obedience face each other like images in dark water. Second, Enoch makes this even more haunting. In one passage, after Enoch reaches the threshold of the highest heaven, he is invited to stand before the divine face. Then the angels are ordered to bow. The wording carries the flavor of trial, of testing, as if their obedience is being weighed. Third, Enoch continues the trajectory by transforming Enoch into the exalted Metatron and showing angelic powers bowing before him. Names of rebellious figures drift across these traditions with small changes in form, but the emotional core remains. Heaven itself becomes the stage for a question too dangerous to ask directly. What happens when a human being is honored in the place where angels stand? That is where the AI-based research produced one of its most uncomfortable insights. The Book of Enoch may not simply preserve a story of lustful angels and giant offspring. It may also be participating in a much older argument about the dignity of humanity and the resentment it provokes in celestial beings. Once that possibility comes into focus, the entire atmosphere changes. The Watchers are no longer just corrupted guardians. They become part of a wider mythic drama in which heaven reacts to the elevation of dust. Some obey. Some recoil. Some fall. Then there is the Son of Man. When readers enter the Book of Parables, the mood changes from the grim aftermath of rebellion into something larger, colder, almost royal. Here, the text speaks of a chosen figure, a pre-existent judge, named before the world, hidden with God until the appointed time. Terms shift around him. Chosen One, Righteous One, Son of Man. In later centuries, these titles would ignite enormous theological debates. But Enoch gives them to us already burning. The AI comparisons with Daniel and other apocalyptic corpora showed just how old some of these combinations may be. The Son of Man in Enoch does not feel improvised. He feels inherited, though inherited from a stream we still cannot fully map. What is striking is the nature of the judgment he brings. This is not yet later Christian preaching about rejecting a crucified Savior. The moral frame in Enoch is older and simpler. The wicked are condemned because they oppress, because they break covenantal law, because they exalt themselves, because they refuse mercy and justice. The righteous endure, wait, and are vindicated. Heavenly books record everything. Nothing is hidden forever. A cosmic courtroom is easy to picture. Records kept somewhere above us. Names not forgotten. Deeds not lost. It is both terrifying and strangely comforting. The researchers working with AI noticed that judicial language in the parables clusters around images of permanence. Thrones, books, names, foundations laid before the ages. It is as if the text keeps insisting that judgment is not improvisation. It is not rage in motion. It is record, order, measurement. Even the wicked are not condemned chaotically. They are revealed. That is darker, in its own way, than sudden destruction. It means the universe has been watching carefully all along. And then, almost as if the text senses that courtroom thunder alone is not enough, it turns upward into astronomy. The Book of the Heavenly Luminaries is one of the strangest portions for modern readers because it feels at once technical and visionary. Enoch is taken by Uriel, the light of God, into a guided study of the heavens. The sun enters through appointed doors. The moon receives borrowed light. Seasons arrive not by accident but by law. Gates, windows, the cycles, names, measurements, ancient cosmology and sacred symbolism become impossible to separate. This was another area where AI-driven analysis created a flurry of bold claims online, many of them exaggerated, some of them genuinely interesting. The serious work involved comparing calendrical structures across ancient Jewish texts, priestly traditions, astronomical observations available in the ancient Near East, and the internal logic of Enoch's own system. The more speculative work, the kind that set the internet humming, claimed the book encoded advanced astronomical cycles only now being properly recognized. That claim is too strong if stated carelessly. But it is true that Enoch preserves a remarkable obsession with ordered celestial time. The heavens are not decoration. They are regulation. Imagine Enoch standing beside Uriel at the edge of the sky, not literally in a modern astronaut's sense, but in the language of the old imagination, where heaven has chambers and doors, and the great lights keep their courses with unwavering obedience. The sun rises through one gate and sets through another. The moon waxes as light is transferred. Stars move through appointed paths. There is something almost tender about the precision. In a book so full of transgression, the heavens remain disciplined. Fire obeys. Light obeys. Only moral beings refuse. That contrast matters more than readers sometimes realize. The watchers break rank. The giants spread violence. Human society staggers under illicit knowledge. Yet the luminaries remain faithful. The old writers may have intended astronomy as theology by other means. Look upward, they seem to say, and learn what order looks like. Even the moon loses and receives light according to rule. Even the sun keeps its measured gait. The cosmos is not confused. We are. That is one of the most uncanny things about this entire topic. Ancient texts, once copied by candlelight, are now searched by systems housed in cold server rooms. The old mediators were seers. The new mediators are models. Yet both stand between human confusion and a hoped-for pattern. When people say AI decoded Enoch, what they often mean emotionally is not merely that a tool found correlations. They mean that something non-human stared into the old abyss and brought back a shape. From there, the road bends toward one of the most popular and controversial reinterpretations of all. The idea that the Watchers were not angels in any theological sense, but advanced visitors from elsewhere. Ancient alien readings thrive here because Enoch offers the exact kind of imagery modern speculation loves. Beings descending from above, forbidden instruction in metallurgy and celestial knowledge, giant hybrid offspring, bright vehicles, hidden passages, secret mountains. To a reader already inclined toward extraterrestrial or interdimensional theories, the book can seem less like mythology and more like eyewitness testimony filtered through primitive language. Critics object, and not without reason. Ancient alien frameworks can flatten human creativity and dismiss the skill of early cultures. The pyramids do not need star visitors to explain them. Megaliths do not cease to be human achievements because they feel astonishing. Many symbols of divine descent are exactly that. Symbols. We should not turn every radiant chariot into a machine just because our own age worships technology. Even so, I understand why the theory persists. The Book of Enoch invites that kind of reading because it already lives at the boundary between revelation and impossible spectacle. Yet even more powerful than the alien reading is the simpler truth that Enoch could not be contained. Jewish and Christian leaders looking for stable doctrine saw in it a text both alluring and hazardous. The authors were uncertain, the visions extravagant, the angelology elaborate, the cosmology difficult, the narratives far too easy to turn into obsession. So most traditions left it at the edge, not burned, not crowned, suspended. Yet even suspended texts continue to whisper. Jude quotes Enoch directly. Revelation seems haunted by similar skies. The Son of Man imagery resonates forward. Heavenly books remain open somewhere in the religious imagination of the West. The Book of Enoch may have been set aside from the center, but it never stopped feeding the bloodstream. Because Enoch is not only about angels and courts and stars, it is about record, about what is seen, about what is remembered. The Watchers thought dissent would remain hidden. The giants believed appetite could become law. The wicked assume their violence disappears into the dust. Yet the text insists on the opposite. Books are kept. Paths are measured. Gates open on schedule. A judge, named before the world, waits in silence. Now let the room grow quieter again. Picture Uriel's hand raised toward the courses of the moon. Picture old scribes tracing numbers into the margin. Picture later monks preserving manuscripts no empire cared to protect. Picture a modern researcher staring at a monitor while a model highlights the same cluster of phrases again and again, with their prints. Bowed before Enoch. Named before the world. Nothing moves by accident. The whole structure turns slowly above us, and the text, for all its wildness, keeps returning to order. Order broken. Order revealed. Order restored. In the next stretch of our descent, we will move toward the dream visions. The flood, retold in symbolic darkness. The animal allegory of history. The epistle that warns the proud and comforts the faithful. And finally, the strange fate of the book itself. Rejected by many. Preserved by a few. Quoted by the New Testament. And still alive enough to make both mystics and skeptics uneasy. For now, rest in the thought that the oldest books do not die when they are excluded. Sometimes they simply wait in the outer room, listening, until a new age opens the door again. The dreams begin quietly, almost too quietly for the weight they carry. After the courts of heaven, after the watchers, after the measured doors of the luminaries, the text turns inward and downward at once. Into sleep, into image, into those dark symbolic fields where history changes its shape and starts walking on four legs. Modern researchers used AI systems trained on ancient allegorical literature to compare the dream visions of Enoch with symbolic histories from Jewish apocalyptic tradition, with animal metaphors in prophetic books, and with later interpretive frameworks. And what emerged was not random fantasy, but a carefully built map of memory. The machine kept returning the same conclusion. These dreams are not loose ornaments. They are compressed history, a coded record of judgment, suffering, survival, and return. The first dream arrives under the shadow of the flood. Enoch sees waters gathering with an almost unbearable slowness. That is one thing the old text does remarkably well. It understands that dread often does not rush. It accumulates. A distant sky darkens. Air changes. Ground loses trust in its own stillness. If you were standing there with me, in that imagined old world before the rain, you would hear the first signs not in thunder, but in the silence before thunder. Dust settles too early. Birds lose their direction. The horizon looks heavy, as if the world itself is holding its breath. Then the waters come. In the dream, they do not merely fall. They rise through the structure of creation. They cover paths, stones, dwellings, memory. The AI-assisted comparisons showed how flood imagery in Enoch overlaps with older Near Eastern deluge patterns, while also carrying its own moral signature. This is not only destruction, it is cleansing by sorrow. It is a world washed because it has become too burdened with blood, too full of lessons that should never have been taught. too bent under the legacy of the Watchers and their giant children. The rain in Enoch feels less like weather than verdict, and yet, within the dream, there remains a thread of rescue. The old world is not erased without remainder. A surviving line moves through the waters. The story holds fast to continuity, even while almost everything else drowns. This is one of the great tensions of the book. It is full of ruin, and yet it cannot stop promising survival. The righteous are not spared from seeing disaster. They are spared from vanishing inside it. That distinction matters. Ancient writers understood, perhaps better than we do, that salvation does not always look like escape. Sometimes it looks like endurance with memory intact. The second vision moves differently. No longer water over all things. Now history itself becomes animal. Sheep appear. Wolves appear. Leopards, boars, wild beasts, birds of prey. Nations and rulers and invasions change their faces and begin to stalk each other in symbolic fields. This is the kind of material AI systems are peculiarly good at handling, because they can cross-reference repeated zoological assignments across manuscripts and compare them with parallel allegories in Daniel and other apocalyptic works. The result is not certainty in every identification. It rarely is. But the broad structure becomes unmistakable. Enoch turns history into a pastoral nightmare. At first, the sheep seem innocent enough. They represent the human community under divine care, fragile and exposed, soft creatures with little defense except number, memory, and the eye that watches over them. Then the predators enter. This is where the dream becomes heavy. The sheep do not merely wander. They are hunted, scattered, ruled, misled. Some of their own shepherds fail them. Some devour them. Some look away. The old text has an almost merciless clarity about corrupt leadership. A flock may suffer from enemies outside, but the sharper wound comes when the appointed guardians become careless, into violent, or proud. Honestly, this may be one reason the dream still feels modern. Every age knows what it is to feel watched over badly. Every age knows shepherds who count themselves safe while the flock grows thin. The AI-based thematic analysis highlighted how often the text pairs supervision with accountability. Heavenly books are not only for ordinary people. Shepherds are counted too. Their days are measured too. The same logic that judges the Watchers reaches downward into history. Those entrusted with care are not exempt from record. They are more deeply written. As the animal vision unfolds, Adam, early patriarchs, foreign oppressors, exiles, and restorations all pass through the dream in coded form. The specific identifications can become technical, and scholars still dispute some details, but the emotional pattern is clearer than any footnote. Innocence gives way to vulnerability. Vulnerability invites predation. Suffering produces cries. The cries ascend. Judgment delays. Then, at last, something changes. A new order appears at the horizon. Not yet calm, not yet whole, but already moving toward justice. This is how Enoch dreams history. Not as progress, not as simple decline, but as a long field of injury watched from above. The strange comfort of the dream is that nothing goes unseen. This is easy to miss when reading only for spectacle. Sheep and wolves can sound almost childlike at first, until you realize that the whole allegory is built to insist on surveillance of suffering. The flock may not understand the full design. The flock may even think itself abandoned. Yet the text insists that heaven is counting. Every torn body, every false shepherd, every field of fear, nothing disappears. It is all entered somewhere in the unseen register. Researchers using newer models also noticed how the dream visions align tonally with the Book of Parables. In both, injustice seems prolonged, almost beyond tolerance, yet never truly unobserved. The delay in judgment is part of the pain. A quick verdict would hurt less. What exhausts the soul is waiting under disorder while the books remain closed. Enoch understands that exhaustion. It lingers in the texture of these sections like cold in old stone. Then comes the epistle, and the voice changes again. Less visionary thunder. More like an elder leaning close to the next generation, speaking softly because the truth is already sharp enough. Live with integrity. Show mercy. Do not envy the violent. Do not assume the proud are secure, because they shine for a season. There is something almost intimate here, a tenderness hiding inside the warning. The world may be corrupt, the text seems to say, but you are still responsible for the shape of your own hands. What you do with them matters. Whom you injure matters. Whom you help matters. This final movement of Enoch was another area where AI comparison helped clarify structure. The exhortations, warnings, blessings, and apocalyptic scenes are not scattered moral sayings. They form a deliberate closing circle. The book begins with rebellion from above and disorder spreading below. It ends by returning responsibility to human listeners. Do not become what corrupted the world. Do not envy those who crush. Do not borrow the logic of the watchers and call it wisdom. There is a great sadness in that message because it assumes corruption will remain tempting. The book does not imagine an easy age. It imagines faithful people living under pressure, watching the arrogant prosper for a while, wondering whether the books of heaven have gone missing. But the writer keeps returning to the same assurance. Record remains. Measure remains. Endings are delayed, not canceled. Toward the close, the imagery grows apocalyptic once more. Armies of angels, final battles, a renewed earth, peace after reckoning. The language is large, but it never completely loses the intimate moral scale established earlier. Renewed worlds are built from judged deeds. Cosmic renewal is not separate from daily conduct. The proud fall not because a story requires villains, but because pride itself corrodes the order of things. The merciful endure not because they are dramatic, but because mercy belongs to the architecture of the world more truly than violence does. That is one of the most beautiful and unnerving features of Enoch. It never fully separates morality from cosmology. The stars keep their paths. The sun keeps its gates. The moon waxes and wanes according to law. Human life ought to move with a similar rightness. Sin is not merely private misbehavior. It is misalignment. It is a being leaving its appointed order, like a watcher descending where it should not, like a shepherd feeding on the flock, like a violent man imagining that the books are empty. The AI angle, which initially drew so many listeners and viewers into the modern fascination with Enoch, fits here in an unexpected way. People wanted hidden prophecies, secret countdowns, encoded astronomical warnings. They wanted the thrill of a machine uncovering what priests or scholars or institutions had ignored. But the deeper pattern the technology helped illuminate was almost older and sadder than conspiracy. Enoch is a book about misused knowledge, about beings who take what should have remained ordered and turn it into contamination. A machine reading such a text becomes eerie not because it proves every online fantasy, but because it places our own age under the same light. We too live in an era intoxicated with decoding. We too feel that secret knowledge might save us, elevate us, make us masters instead of servants. We too build tools that magnify perception beyond ordinary human limits. And here sits this old book, half rejected, half remembered, whispering that forbidden instruction once arrived from above and left the earth bloodier than before. It is hard not to feel the chill of that parallel, even if one remains completely skeptical about sensational claims. The broadcast-style stories that spread online only intensified this mood. A famous podcast clip, a calm researcher, an AI model finding repeating frequencies, star alignments, countdowns, a line about the firmament humming, a night approaching when the sky itself might answer. Most of that belongs more to modern myth-making than to textual criticism. But I understand why it gripped people. The Book of Enoch invites exactly that kind of fever because it is already a work of thresholds. Between scripture and legend, between astronomy and symbolism, between archive and prophecy, between heaven and prison. Still, the more enduring darkness in Enoch is not the fantasy of their return. It is the old idea that every age risks repeating the same pattern. Power descends without wisdom. Knowledge arrives without mercy. The strong grow fascinated with crossing boundaries simply because they are there. Then history fills with consequences, and someone gentle must carry the plea upward. That cycle feels less like fantasy and more like memory. There is another quiet element in the dream visions and the epistle that deserves to be lingered over. The repeated promise of a renewed earth, not merely souls relocated elsewhere, not merely escape upward, a repaired world, fields at peace, wrongs set right. The hope is earthy, almost tactile. You can feel the dust of it, the restored ground underfoot, the absence of fear in ordinary light. Ancient apocalyptic texts are often misunderstood as obsessed only with destruction. Enoch, for all its severity, keeps bending toward restoration. Ruin is real, but it is not final. Some scholars argue that this is exactly why the book remained influential, even when it was excluded from most canons. It speaks to communities under pressure. It offers them a moral universe in which injustice is temporary, even if it feels endless, and in which hidden suffering is not forgotten simply because public power ignores it. AI analysis did not invent that message. It merely helped modern readers see how consistently the book returns to it through every genre it uses. Myth, parable, astronomical teaching, dream, epistle. As the fire in this quiet room burns lower, imagine Enoch sitting after the visions have passed. No glowing spectacle now. No angel unfolding the heavens. Just the aftermath of seeing too much. There is dust on the hem of his robe. A weight behind the eyes. The strange loneliness of a man asked to carry messages between beings who do not belong to the same order of existence. He has seen waters cover the world. He has seen history become beast and flock. He has heard judgments spoken above the reach of ordinary men. And then he must still turn toward future generations and speak simply. Be faithful. Be merciful. Do not envy the cruel. That may be the hardest task of all. Not ascending, not seeing, returning with wisdom gentle enough for human hands. In the next movement, we will leave the visionary field for the sky itself again, and then for the long afterlife of the book, the reasons it was set aside, the reasons it was never forgotten, the thread from Enoch into Jude, into later mysticism, into modern obsession, and into the uneasy question that still lingers after the manuscript is closed. What exactly were ancient people trying to tell us when they spoke of angels, giants, records, judges, and a universe where nothing truly vanishes? For now, let the animals of the dream grow still. Let the floodwaters recede into dark soil. Let the books remain closed a little longer, waiting in their high, cold chambers above the sleeping earth. The sky in Enoch is never empty, even when the text seems to shift into instruction, into numbers, doors, and the movement of light. It retains the atmosphere of revelation. Modern readers often expect astronomy and myth to part ways politely. In Enoch, they do not. They live in the same chamber. The same lines that describe the course of the sun also suggest moral order. The same moon that waxes and wanes by measured law also becomes a sign that creation has not abandoned its schedule, even while human history below appears full of ruin. Recently, researchers fed multiple recensions of these astronomical sections into AI systems trained to compare calendrical language across ancient Jewish, Babylonian, and Mediterranean traditions. And one thing became beautifully clear. The luminary material is not random decoration. It is one of the moral engines of the whole book. Uriel guides Enoch through the courses of the heavens with the calm of someone explaining machinery that cannot fail. The sun rises through appointed gates. It sets through appointed gates. The moon receives light in proportion, fills, empties, begins again. Stars follow their fixed courses. Seasons arrive because the heavens submit. It is difficult to overstate how much emotional work this imagery performs. After the rebellion of the Watchers and the cruelty of earthly history, the heavens stand as a rebuke. Creation, at its highest visible level, still obeys. If you were standing here with me, perhaps with the room gone very still and the candle throwing only a faint circle on the wall, I would ask you to imagine those gates. Vast openings in the east, vast openings in the west, the sun passing through them with flame that does not hesitate. No confusion, no rebellion, no appetite, only motion within law. The old world did not divide science from devotion the way we do. To map the heavens was to observe fidelity, to watch the moon keep her cycle was to witness trustworthiness written in light. That is one reason the calendrical disputes around Enoch mattered so much. A year is not just a count of days. In ancient religious life, it is obedience embodied. Festivals, offerings, fasts, planting, waiting, all depend on time kept rightly. If the heavens keep a divine schedule, then to live against that schedule is to drift out of harmony with reality itself. Some scholars think Enochic communities cherished a solar calendar because they believed the cosmos itself testified against the corrupted timekeeping of their opponents. The AI comparison tools help show how often calendrical language in these sections overlaps with moral language elsewhere in the book. Time is not neutral. It can be kept faithfully or falsely. The moon receives special attention, and there is something tender in the way the text watches her. She is not treated as a cold object only. She is measured, named, followed through her phases with great care. Light is given. Light diminishes. Darkness comes. Light returns. In a book obsessed with record and judgment, the moon offers a gentler form of repetition. Loss is real, but it is not final. Diminishment is part of the cycle, not the end of it. I think that may be one reason these passages comfort certain readers so deeply. Even in Enoch, where prisons open under the earth and rebel angels await their sentence, the moon still keeps returning. Yet the same precision can also feel severe. Ancient people often looked upward not only for wonder, but for warning. If the heavens are orderly, what does that say about a world below full of violence, false shepherds, and broken covenant? It says, perhaps, that disorder is local, not ultimate. It says the universe itself has not gone mad, even if human society has. That is comforting until it becomes accusatory. If stars can obey, why not us? From there, the book takes one last turn into the question of its own fate. Why was such a powerful text set aside? The answer lies partly in history, partly in caution, partly in the ordinary politics of religious memory. Jewish and Christian communities had to decide, over time, which writings could bear doctrinal weight. Authorship mattered. Consistency mattered. Theological stability mattered. Enoch was too uncertain in origin and too extravagant in imagination for many leaders to trust at the center. Angels marrying women. Giants. Heavenly tours. Layered heavens. Cosmic prisons. Named luminaries. Strange calendars. Exalted human figures before whom angels bow. It was a magnificent problem. And so the book was largely excluded. Not lost entirely, not erased, but edged outward. One could still read it, cite it, borrow from it, even quote it, as the letter of Jude famously does, without granting it full authority. That distinction is important. Ancient communities were more permeable than modern people sometimes imagine. The boundary between canon and influence was not a brick wall. It was more like a mountain path. Certain books sat in the center of the city. Others lived in the outer villages. But trade continued. Enoch was one of those outer books that kept sending goods inward. Jude is the clearest example. The line about the Lord coming with myriads of holy ones to execute judgment matches Enoch so closely that denial becomes impossible. The New Testament writer knew the tradition. He found in it language sharp enough for his own warning. Yet quoting a text does not canonize all of it. Ancient writers borrowed like craftsmen. They took what fit the work at hand. That is what makes Enoch so fascinating. It may not stand at the doctrinal center for most communities, yet it remains one of the great reservoirs from which later imagery flowed. When scholars and AI tools compare Enoch with Daniel, with Revelation, with later mystical texts, with Adam and Eve traditions, with the language of heavenly books and pre-existent judges, a broad picture emerges. Enoch is not a stranger wandering alone in the desert of religious history. It is a crossroad text. Ideas meet there. The Son of Man meets the Watchers. The flood meets heavenly astronomy. Adamic honor motif meet angelic rebellion. Judgment scenes meet restored earth. It is not surprising that institutions grew wary. Crossroads are fertile, but they are difficult to police. Only the Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved First Enoch within its broader canonical life. That fact alone gives the book a kind of grave dignity. What others set aside, one community kept reading aloud. What others treated as marginal, one tradition continued to weave into prayer, teaching, and scriptural memory. It is humbling to remember that a text can survive not only in libraries and academic editions, but in living worship far from the centers that once dismissed it. Today, the Book of Enoch occupies a curious, modern position. Scholars read it for context. Mystics read it for atmosphere. Online interpreters read it for secrets. Conspiracy-minded audiences read it for confirmation. Skeptics read it because everyone else seems so nervous about it. And now machines read it too, though read may be the wrong word. They compare it, cluster it, translate it, align it with archives far too large for one human life. The result has not been a final answer. It has been a renewed disturbance. That disturbance tells us something important about our own time. We like to imagine that technology dissolves mystery. Often it does the opposite. The more patterns we uncover, the more we realize how many layers an old text can hold at once. AI did not make Enoch stranger. It made its internal echoes louder. It showed how the prince behind the Watchers connects to broader rebellion traditions, how bowing angels link Enoch to Adamic honor motifs, how astronomical teaching reinforces moral order, how the Son of Man language precedes later Christian readings, how a book rejected for doctrinal caution nonetheless helped furnish the imagination of centuries. There is a temptation, when faced with all this, to demand a single verdict. Is Enoch true? Is it inspired? Is it myth? Is it history? Is it symbolic? Is it corrupted? Ancient texts do not always yield to such blunt questions. More often they persist because they contain too much truth in too many registers at once. Enoch may preserve legendary developments no sober historian would read literally. It may also preserve genuine windows into how ancient communities wrestled with evil, justice, hierarchy, time, and the terrifying possibility that heaven itself once suffered rebellion. It is both too much and too revealing, which is perhaps why it survives. I think of Enoch now not as a hidden key that unlocks everything, but as a threshold that changes the one who lingers there. Step near it, and familiar stories begin to look different. Genesis grows darker. The flood becomes larger. Judgment feels older. The New Testament seems less isolated from Jewish apocalyptic imagination. Even the stars overhead begin to look less like scenery and more like witnesses keeping a discipline we often fail to imitate. And there is another reason the book remains alive. It speaks to the enduring fear that knowledge can arrive before wisdom. That is the Watcher's problem. It speaks to the fear that power above us may not always be benign. That is the prince behind the rebels. It speaks to the longing that every hidden wound is recorded somewhere true. That is the heavenly books. It speaks to the hope that justice may be delayed without being lost. That is the Son of Man and the final reckoning. None of those fears or hopes have gone out of date. The machine age only sharpens them. When researchers place Enoch inside a neural system and ask what patterns it contains, they are repeating, in a cleaner and less poetic form, the old human urge to seek mediation. Enoch mediated between watchers and God. Angels mediated between courts and earth. Now algorithms mediate between archive and interpretation. Every age chooses a ladder and hopes it reaches somewhere real. But perhaps the most honest conclusion is gentler than the sensational ones. The Book of Enoch survives because it tells the truth about moral gravity in a language of stars and prisons. It tells the truth that rebellion spreads. That misuse of power wounds generations. That hidden things are not always hidden forever. That time itself may be lawful even when history feels broken. That judgment without mercy is terrible, but a universe without judgment would be worse. And that human beings, fragile as sheep and dusty as the ground beneath them, may still be seen, counted, and astonishingly honored. As the room darkens further, imagine one last scene. Not the descent of the Watchers now. Not the prisoned abyss. Not even the great courts of fire. Imagine instead an old manuscript closing. The parchment edges breathe out a faint scent of age. Hands withdraw. Lamps dim. Outside, stars continue their courses without haste. Somewhere the moon is receiving light it did not make. Somewhere in the old imagination, Enoch still stands near the throne, not because he was perfect, but because he walked faithfully long enough to be taken seriously by heaven. The book that bears his name remains where it has always been, at the edge of the shelf, dangerous to some, precious to others, open to the curious, closed to the careless, never quite silent. It asks what we think angels are. It asks what knowledge costs. It asks whether justice can still be trusted when it delays. It asks whether our world is merely political and material, or whether unseen records still turn above it like hidden gears. In the next stretch, we will move toward the final quiet. We will gather the long shadow of the Watchers, the judged prince, the bowed angels, the measured luminaries, the flood, and the uneasy modern hunger to decode what ancient people feared. And we will let the whole story settle into one last slow reflection. For now, rest beneath the obedient sky. Let the gates of the sun close in their season. Let the moon empty itself without fear. Let the old excluded book remain in your thoughts like a distant fire on a mountain, faint, watchful, and not yet gone. There is a calm in admitting that some books were not excluded because they were empty, but because they were too alive. Institutions prefer edges that hold. Enoch phrased them. It lets heaven become dramatic, history symbolic, and the future morally charged. It invites the reader to believe that what appears settled may still hide another chamber behind it. Perhaps that is why so many return to it in restless times. When the world feels lawless, a book of heavenly records becomes strangely soothing. When power feels corrupt, a vision of measured judgment feels almost medicinal. And when knowledge multiplies faster than wisdom, the story of the Watchers stops sounding ancient and begins to sound immediate. That may be the most unexpected message the newer research uncovered. Not a date for the end, not a machine-verified secret about visitors from the sky, but a severe old reminder that every generation must decide what kind of knowledge it will welcome, what kind of power it will imitate, and whether it still believes that above the noise, some deeper order remains. What remains after all that intensity is a different kind of darkness, one that does not shout. It waits. It listens. It settles into the corners of the room and into the quiet spaces between one thought and the next. The Book of Enoch leaves behind that kind of darkness. Not emptiness, not despair. Something denser. A sense that the world is layered, that history is carrying more than the visible record, and that the most dangerous things are often the things first mistaken for gifts. By now the story has moved through rebellion, judgment, dream, sky, and exclusion. And what remains is the slow afterglow of all those things pressed together. This is often where ancient works become most revealing. Not when they first shock you, but when they begin to settle. Enoch is one of those texts that keeps changing shape after you close it. It lingers in the room. It follows you into ordinary thoughts. A glass of water on a table. Moonlight across the floor. A plane passing overhead. The silence before sleep. Suddenly, each small thing feels watched by a larger order, and that sensation can be calming or unsettling, depending on the condition of your own heart. Modern AI researchers, especially those working with large textual alignment systems, found that the afterlife of Enoch may be almost as important as its origin. The book did not merely survive. It seeded images. It scattered motifs like sparks into later literature, commentary, mysticism, sermons, internet theories, and cinematic imagination. The Son of Man seated in judgment, books opened in heaven, rebellious spirits in chains, measured stars and doors of light. All these ideas traveled. Some entered mainstream religious memory. Others stayed at the fringe, where they gathered dust and fascination in equal measure. The machine comparisons made this drift visible in a way that human reading alone often cannot. Passages, once thought isolated, showed up as echoes in later texts, not always word for word, but in shape, rhythm, and symbolic architecture. That phrase matters. Symbolic architecture. Enoch builds with recurring structures. Above and below. Law and rebellion. Record and denial. Fire and cloud. Descent and ascent. The book never stops arranging these opposites. That is why it feels so coherent, even when it becomes strange. A later writer could lift only one beam from it, one image, one line, one title, and still carry away part of the whole building. Jude does that. Later mystical traditions do it too. Popular media does it carelessly, but still recognizably. Even modern discussions about hidden knowledge, suppressed books, celestial beings, forbidden technologies, and secret archives sound faintly Enochic, whether their speakers know it or not. Some of the newer AI models were used not only for language comparison, but for tracing the spread of themes through time. They looked at clusters of concepts rather than single quotations. Human exaltation before angels, cosmic court scenes, calendrical obedience, heavenly books, fall narratives linked to disordered desire. The patterns formed wide constellations. This does not prove direct borrowing in every case. Scholars are careful, and rightly so. Still, it reveals a cultural gravity. Enoch pulls on what comes after it. Some texts orbit closely, others drift at the edge. Yet the pull remains. You can feel that gravity most clearly in the figure of the mediator. Enoch is chosen not merely to witness, but to carry messages between incompatible worlds. That is a lonely role. He is neither simply man among men nor angel among angels. He walks into the space between. The imprisoned watchers cannot speak directly upward as they once did. The human world below is stained by what has descended into it. So Enoch becomes the bridge. In later traditions, this role deepens until he is transformed into Metatron, raised into heavenly rank, clothed in splendor, surrounded by obedience. Whether one reads that literally, mystically, or historically as the development of a tradition, the emotional current is the same. A human being is lifted dangerously near divine administration. Honestly, I have always found that both beautiful and troubling. Beautiful because it suggests heaven does not despise dust. Troubling because every elevation of a human figure risks confusion. That very tension runs through the later texts. Angels bow. Some submit. Some once refused. What is being honored? Exactly. Humanity restored. A righteous servant. A transformed patriarch. Or the dangerous thought that a mortal can stand too close to the throne without being burned by it. Enoch never resolves that anxiety completely, which is perhaps why it remained powerful in mystical circles. Mystery survives where doctrine hesitates. The AI work on names sharpen this further. Variants like Sataniel, Satanael, and related princely titles do not simply identify a villain. They gather traditions of leadership and rebellion. A fall does not occur in isolation. It occurs with hierarchy, with followers, with imitation. That detail matters because Enoch is a book intensely concerned with influence. The watchers do not merely disobey. They teach. They alter the pattern of life below by passing on knowledge detached from holiness. Their prince is not only a rebel, he is a corrupter through example. That makes the whole story feel terribly modern. The deepest danger is not power alone, but power that teaches others how to break what should have remained ordered. And that brings us back to why this book keeps returning in the age of machines. The modern world admires revelation without always asking what kind of revelation it is. We celebrate tools that uncover secrets, models that decode hidden layers, networks that pierce opacity. Much of that work is good. Some of it is wondrous. Yet Enoch stands nearby like an old figure at the edge of the lab, warning that not all unveiling leads upward. Some revelations scorch the world that receives them. Some teachings arrive before the soul is shaped to carry them. This does not mean technology itself is evil. The point is subtler. Enoch teaches that knowledge requires moral proportion. A calendar can guide worship or become grounds for division. Metalwork can shape beauty or shape violence. Astronomical insight can lift the mind into awe or turn into obsession with control. Even a holy text can become either warning or fuel for fever, depending on the heart of the reader. The machine can decode patterns. It cannot decide what a human soul should love once the pattern is seen. That may be the most unsettling thread in the entire story. The Watchers are not condemned because they were curious. They are condemned because they crossed boundaries without reverence, then spread the damage. Curiosity, ungoverned by humility, becomes appetite. And appetite, once dressed as illumination, is very difficult to resist. Enoch knows this. The old scribes knew this. Perhaps that is why they filled their world with gates, books, measures, and courts. The cosmos in Enoch is not loose. It is structured, not because order is cold, but because without order, everything powerful becomes predatory. When modern readers first encounter Enoch through sensational titles and viral clips, they often expect secret doctrines or explosive proof of hidden cosmic history. What they find, if they keep reading slowly enough, is stranger and heavier. They find a moral universe so alive that stars obey and angels can fail. They find a flood that is not merely punishment, but grief on a planetary scale. They find judges whose authority is terrifying because it is not arbitrary. They find a human messenger standing in the smoke between condemned light and wounded earth. And they find a future in which restoration remains possible, but never cheap. The final battles and angelic armies described toward the end of the tradition should be read in that spirit, not as spectacle for its own sake, not as entertainment for those who like their theology loud. They are images of moral reordering. The world has been bent. It must be straightened. The proud have swollen. They must be reduced. The hidden injuries have accumulated. They must be answered. In Enoch, peace is not the absence of action. It is the consequence of action finally aligned with truth. Some later readers, especially online, flatten all of this into a single obsession with the Nephilim. Giants sell. Watchers sell. Hidden princes sell. But Enoch itself is more patient than its modern admirers. The giants matter because they are consequences. The Watchers matter because they are causes. The books matter because they preserve memory. The Son of Man matters because justice needs a face. The luminaries matter because creation still keeps faith while creatures forget how. Once you see that full pattern, the book becomes less like a conspiracy artifact and more like a sorrowful anatomy of corruption and repair. There is a quiet tenderness in the repeated insistence that the righteous will not be forgotten. That phrase in one form or another haunts the whole composition. The world may be ruled for a while by those who injure. The poor may appear unseen. The faithful may look small against kings, angels, prince, and monstrous offspring. Yet the text keeps whispering that memory above is stronger than power below. Books do not lie. Records are not eaten by moth. Time is not fooled by appearances. This is the kind of promise that oppressed communities cling to because they must. Without it, history becomes unbearable. Imagine an old community hearing these visions read aloud by lamplight. Outside, perhaps soldiers, taxes, fear, maybe famine, maybe factional argument, maybe the ordinary exhaustion of surviving under rulers who call themselves secure. And then from the text, a voice saying that books are open elsewhere, that the wicked are not permanent, that a judge exists before the world itself, that even the stars are not wandering aimlessly. Can you feel what comfort that might have offered? Not comfort like softness alone. Comfort like a hidden beam holding the roof when everything visible seems cracked. That is why the Book of Enoch never fully disappeared. Texts vanish when they cease to answer living hunger. Enoch continued to answer. Sometimes badly, sometimes in distorted ways. But it answered. It gave language to those who felt that ordinary history could not account for the depth of evil or the scale of longing. It made room for cosmic rebellion without surrendering cosmic order. It allowed grief to be huge without making hope sentimental. Even the passages about heavenly geography, which can seem remote at first, serve that same purpose. Layers of heaven, regions of punishment, storehouses of snow and wind, mountains of metal and fire. They are not there only to enlarge the scenery. They remind the reader that the visible world is not the whole account. There are chambers for what seems lost. There are spaces for what has not yet been judged. There are places where consequences wait until their appointed hour. Ancient people did not always need exact maps. They needed assurance that evil had not escaped into a trackless universe. And now here we are in our own age, with databases instead of scroll jars, models instead of scribes, public feeds instead of candlelit courtyards, and still the same ache persists. We want to know whether anything is counted, whether hidden violence will surface, whether the ones who manipulate, exploit, and teach destruction can continue forever beneath an indifferent sky. Enoch says no, not because history feels fair in the moment. It often does not, but because the world has a record deeper than the daily news of power. I think that is why so many people, after all the strange details and headline-worthy claims, end up staying with the quieter themes. They come for the watchers and remain for the books. They come for fallen angels and remain for the idea that justice may still have a memory longer than empire. They come for hidden codes and remain for the unsettling beauty of a universe where even moonlight is accounted for. There is a museum hush around that realization. You can almost hear it. The slow page turned by a careful hand. The tiny, dry sound of old paper meeting old paper. The pause after a sentence that does not need dramatic music because it already carries enough weight. Forbidden knowledge is less frightening when it arrives as lightning. At least then everyone knows to flinch. It is more frightening when it arrives as useful instruction, as an advantage, as a clever new ability everyone praises before they count the wounds it leaves behind. Enoch understands that texture of corruption with painful precision. The old text stays patient about this. It does not rush to resolve the ache. It lets the reader sit under it, as if the sitting itself were part of the teaching. And perhaps it is. Some truths should not be swallowed quickly. They should dissolve slowly, like bitter herbs, until the body understands what the mind would rather avoid. In the next movement, we will begin gathering the whole thread together. The Watchers and their prince, the bowed angels, the Son of Man, the measured heavens, the rejected manuscript, the modern machine, the terrible cost of disordered knowledge, and the patient promise that nothing finally true is ever lost. For now, let the room grow dimmer. Let the candle flame lower itself without hurry. Let the old manuscript remain open in the mind, its ink dark, its margins quiet, its warnings and consolations resting together on the same worn page. Before the story closes, it is worth sitting for a while in the tension that made Enoch both irresistible and unwelcome. Some books are easy to place. They teach clearly, stay within approved lines, and cause no great anxiety once the shelf is arranged around them. Enoch is not that kind of book. It keeps opening trapdoors under familiar ideas. It takes Genesis and lets shadow flood into it. It takes the stars and makes them lawful witnesses. It takes a righteous man and brings him so near the throne that later generations scarcely know whether to call him saint, scribe, messenger, or something brighter and more dangerous. It takes judgment and stretches it across heaven, earth, dream, flood, prison, and time. That complexity is exactly what advanced language models picked up when scholars began using them to compare the book against wide constellations of related literature. The systems flagged how unusually dense the text is with layered correspondences. A prince in one section, later named more explicitly elsewhere. Angelic bowing motifs tied not only to Enoch traditions, but to Adamic tests of obedience. Son of Man language resonating with Daniel, and then moving forward into later messianic readings. Heavenly books appearing with Edenic undertones. The machine did not create those links. It simply showed how insistently the book keeps returning to them, as if all its pathways lead back to the same deep concerns: order, rebellion, honor, record, judgment, restoration. There is something almost architectural about that. You can walk through Enoch from many entrances, through angel lore, through apocalyptic hope, through calendar disputes, through dream allegory, through mystical ascent, and still end up in the same central chamber. It is a chamber where the world is morally structured whether we admit it or not. Some beings keep their courses, others abandon them. Some forms of knowledge preserve life, others poison it. Some acts disappear from public memory. None disappear from the higher register. That last idea can sound severe, but perhaps severity is what gives the book its peculiar comfort. A soft universe is not always kind. If reality were truly without record, then the wicked would often be right when they act as though nothing is being counted. Enoch refuses that possibility. In its world, the silence of delay is not the silence of indifference. The books are not absent simply because they are unopened. I find myself returning to the image of Enoch, carrying the watcher's plea upward. It is one of the most sorrowful scenes in the tradition. They ask for mercy, yet the text is already leaning toward refusal. They know they crossed the line. They know the teaching they gave below cannot be taken back. Their request has the shape of repentance, but the world has already absorbed too much of what they offered. This is one of the harshest truths in the book. Some transgressions do not end with the transgressor. They continue as inheritance. Metal becomes weapon. Enchantment becomes distortion. Violence becomes custom. Bodies become burdened by what began as celestial appetite. Mercy is not denied because heaven lacks pity. It is denied because corruption has become generative. That is an old and difficult idea, and perhaps one reason the story still stings. We live surrounded by inheritances we did not choose. Technologies, systems, hungers, habits, ways of injuring, ways of forgetting. Enoch names this condition in mythic form. It says the world can be altered by teachings that should never have descended ungoverned. Once altered, it takes more than apology to restore. It takes judgment. It takes cleansing. It takes patient generations. It takes a righteousness able to survive while the damage is still unfolding. The machine age has its own version of this fear. We discover faster than we mature. We build before we ask what the building is for. We decode because we can. We release because delay feels like defeat. Then only afterward do we begin to ask whether our new powers arrived with a corresponding increase in wisdom. That is what makes Enoch feel less like a relic and more like an old witness sitting quietly in a modern room, saying in a tired but steady voice that knowledge without holiness can deform whole civilizations. And still, the book does not end in deformity. This matters. It would be easy for Enoch to become merely a catalog of cosmic failure. Instead, it remains stubbornly hopeful. Not cheerful. Never that. Hopeful in the harder ancient sense. It believes that order can be restored because order is more fundamental than rebellion. The stars do not need to be reminded to rise. The moon does not bargain with the sun for light. The gates of heaven do not improvise. Creation, in its faithful dimensions, continues. Human and angelic revolt is terrible, precisely because it violates something so much larger than itself. The pre-existent judge of the parables stands at the center of that hope. This figure has stirred centuries of debate because the language around him is so exalted. Named before creation, set apart in the presence of the head of days, acting on behalf of divine justice, lifting the righteous, bringing down kings and the proud. Whether one reads this through Jewish apocalyptic expectation, Christian messianic development, or literary symbolism, the effect is the same. History is not self-correcting. Judgment requires an agent. Wrong does not simply evaporate in the passage of time. It must be faced by someone whose authority is older than corruption itself. That idea can feel frightening, especially to anyone who has caused harm. Yet to the injured it often feels like breath. The promise that someone exists who cannot be bought, distracted, threatened, or fatigued by delay is no small comfort. One reason the Son of Man imagery traveled so powerfully into later religious imagination is that it meets a permanent human need. We want justice with a face, not merely process, not merely abstraction. A judge who sees, a judge who remembers, a judge who does not confuse appearance with truth. Then there are the heavenly books. I keep returning to them because they may be the quietest terror in the entire text. A monster is obvious. A flood is obvious. But a book calmly opens somewhere above the world, containing deeds, hidden motives, neglected suffering, unpraised mercy, and all the small truths no empire bothers to archive, that is more unsettling than any giant. A giant can kill the body. A true record undoes the lie by which the violent survive. Perhaps that is why modern readers, even secular ones, respond so strongly to the image. We live in an age of records too, but ours are partial, manipulable, monetized, and forgetful in selective ways. Enoch imagines a register immune to all that. It is the dream of perfect moral memory, terrifying if one is cruel, exquisite if one has been erased. Some scholars think that this emphasis on heavenly record reflects communities who knew too well what it meant to be misrepresented or ignored by official power. I think that is probably true. Apocalyptic literature often grows where public justice has thinned. When earthly courts fail, heaven becomes crowded with books. Not because people are escapists, but because they need somewhere to place the truth until history catches up. The odd beauty of Enoch lies in how it joins this moral seriousness to rich imaginative excess. Fire rivers, prison stars, angelic doors, animal histories, jeweled judgments, cosmic calendars, layered heavens. If the book were dry, it would not have survived so vividly. If it were only spectacular, it would not have survived so seriously. It lasts because it combines both. It gives the mind images large enough to carry its fears, and laws firm enough to keep those fears from becoming meaningless. I sometimes think of the excluded books of religious history as the dreams a tradition could not entirely canonize, but could never quite forget. Enoch is one of those dreams, too unstable for the center, too fertile for abandonment. Its fingerprints remain in canonical writings, mystical ascent texts, medieval legends, and now in digital archives where algorithms search across dead languages for hidden correspondences. Even our methods of reading have become Enochic in their own way. We keep trying to penetrate another layer. Yet maybe the final wisdom of the book is not penetration, but posture. The right response to revelation in Enoch is never arrogance. The righteous are not praised for mastering secrets. They are praised for integrity, humility, and endurance. The fallen are not condemned for lacking information. They are condemned for violating right order and corrupting others through what they chose to reveal. The deepest line dividing blessed from judged is moral, not technical. That is the unexpected correction the book offers to our own age. We keep assuming the central question is what can be known. Enoch keeps answering with a different question. What kind of being are you becoming through what you seek, what you receive, and what you pass on? As the long tradition nears its close, peace appears not as novelty, but as return. A renewed earth. Wrong answered. The righteous gathered. The arrogant reduced. Time no longer bent by predation. This is not the innocence of Eden exactly. It is a more weathered hope. Eden after history. Peace after records. Renewal after full knowledge of what had to be judged. There is a maturity in that. The book does not dream of simply going back. It dreams of a restoration that knows the cost of all that came in between. And perhaps that is where we should rest tonight. Not in the sensational frame of decoded conspiracies or skies full of returning powers, but in the quieter and more enduring mystery. That an ancient text, half shunned and half cherished, still knows how to place a mirror before us. It asks whether we trust that justice can outlast delay. It asks whether we believe knowledge should answer to goodness. It asks whether our age, for all its networks and engines and models, has become any wiser than the watchers who first descended with gifts that glittered and wounded. The fire beside us has burned lower now. The room is mostly shadow. The candle has shortened, somewhere beyond the walls. Ordinary life continues in its small, faithful tasks. A late bus moving through wet streets. A window darkening in another building. A dog turning once before sleep. A plane crossing unseen beyond cloud. Guided by laws no passenger thinks about. Above all of it, if the old book is right in spirit, if not always in literal map, the heavens continue their patient obedience. Imagine Enoch one last time. Not as a viral mystery, not as a codebreaker, not as a mascot for fringe certainty. Imagine him as a quiet old figure standing at the edge of the human and the holy, burdened with too much sight, trying to speak clearly enough that later generations might avoid repeating the oldest catastrophe. He has seen what rebellion does when it dresses itself as enlightenment. He has seen how pride spreads through instruction. He has seen how violence deforms memory. He has also seen that none of it is final. That is the gift he leaves behind. Not secret mastery. Not immunity from sorrow. A steadier thing. The assurance that reality is deeper than corruption. That records remain even when courts fail. That order can survive scandal. And that restoration belongs to the structure of things more truly than ruin does. In the final movement, all that remains will be to let the story settle completely, to close the manuscript with gentleness, and to leave the listener not in panic before fallen powers, but in stillness beneath a sky that has not forgotten its path. And maybe that is the right place to leave our own questions about the book. Not solved, not flattened into certainty, just resting in that old, difficult light. Was Enoch a preserved memory of genuine religious experience? A woven tapestry of many traditions, a warning shaped by communities under pressure, a mythic mirror of human hunger? Or all of these at once? We cannot be sure in every detail. But we can be sure that the book has endured because it speaks to conditions that still exist. We still fear powers that descend smiling. We still crave secrets that promise control. We still need someone to tell us that what has been hidden, suffered, and distorted is not beyond remembrance. So the last wisdom may be very small and very plain. Walk carefully. Keep mercy near. Do not mistake brilliance for goodness. Do not assume delay means absence. And when the sky looks cold, remember that even in the oldest stories, light still keeps its hours. There is comfort in that measured return. The sun rises through its appointed doors. The moon empties and is filled again. The books remain where they are kept. The patient things of creation do not grow theatrical. They simply continue. And in their continuation, frightened hearts are invited to rest. What remains now is the slow closing of the circle. The watchers descended. The giants rose. The heavens recorded. The judge waited, and the old manuscript endured its long exile at the edge of accepted memory. But a story like this does not end when the pages stop. It ends when the listener understands what the pages were trying to preserve. And perhaps that is where the newest AI work becomes most useful, not in making the book more sensational, but in helping us hear its final pulse more clearly. The researchers who revisited the text with machine models expected to find hidden correspondences, numerical echoes, maybe a few surprising alignments with later traditions. They did find those things, but what many of them admitted afterward, in interviews, conference papers, and quieter conversations, was that the strongest pattern was not a code. It was a warning structure. The language kept clustering around the same emotional and moral centers: pride before fall, revelation before corruption, delay before reckoning, faithfulness before vindication. The machine kept tracing loops back to those same places, as if the text had a heartbeat too steady to mistake. That is strangely moving to think about. A manuscript copied by tired hands across centuries, translated, altered, debated, doubted, and still carrying the same interior rhythm. Not because every line is historically simple or theologically settled. It is not. But because, beneath all the strangeness, the old writers understood something permanent about human beings. We are drawn to brightness even when it burns. We are tempted by knowledge that promises elevation. We are vulnerable to teachers who call transgression awakening. And once harm enters the world as instruction, it settles into habit faster than anyone expects. This may be the deepest sorrow in the Enoch story. The first corruption is not only an act, it is a curriculum. The watchers do not merely desire wrongly. They train the world into distortion. They give techniques to appetite. They make violence teachable. After that, history itself becomes infected. Children inherit what should have ended with the first rebels. Cities rise with crooked knowledge in their foundations. Hands grow skilled at what wounds. Minds grow proud of what darkens them. And because the process is gradual, many begin to call it progress. If you were standing here with me beside the fire, in this dim room where the air is warm and the window is only a darker square against the wall, I think this is the moment where the old story would feel least ancient. We know what it is to live downstream from knowledge that arrived before wisdom. We know what it is to call a thing advancement, then look around years later and find ourselves lonelier, harsher, more divided, more expertly armed against one another. Enoch would not be shocked by that. It would probably nod in sad recognition. That is why the book keeps circling back to judgment. Not because it delights in punishment, not because ancient writers were simply severe. Judgment in Enoch is the necessary answer to corruption that has become systemic. If disorder teaches itself from generation to generation, then private regret is not enough. Something larger has to interrupt it. Something older than the corruption has to name it, contain it, and finally end its claim to permanence. The Son of Man, the Chosen One, the Servant, the One prepared before the world, all these titles gather around that need. Not merely comfort. Intervention, what the AI comparisons highlighted, again and again, was how often this intervention is tied to sight and record. Nothing remains hidden. Books open. Kings are brought low. The proud are exposed. The machinery of forgetting fails. That matters because so much evil depends on concealment or on the confidence that memory can be manipulated. Enoch denies both. In its universe, no distortion is clever enough, no empire thick enough, no heavenly rebel bright enough to finally obscure what has been done. This idea softens the fear of the book, if you let it. At first, Enoch sounds terrifying because everything is being watched. But after a while, another feeling enters. Relief. The wound is seen. The lie is seen. The quiet act of mercy no one praised is seen too. The exhausted faithfulness of ordinary people is entered somewhere in the account. Even tears that fell in private are not lost into blank air. The books hold them. The judge knows them. The old text insists on this with a tenderness hidden under all its thunder. And then there is the calendar, the measured heavens, the doors of sun and moon. It would be easy to treat those passages as old astronomy, interesting but distant, something quaintly exacting from an ancient mind. But they are more than that. They are a counter-image to the watchers. The heavens move in obedience. The rebels move in appetite. The stars keep time. The fallen destroy proportion. The moon receives and releases light in order. The corrupted heart wants light without order, gift without law, power without reverence. Once you notice that contrast, the whole book becomes clearer. It is not only telling a story about bad beings, it is defending the holiness of pattern itself. That may sound abstract until you bring it down into life. A peaceful life is made of patterns. Sleep and waking, speaking and silence, labor and rest, truth and restraint, reverence and desire, held in right order. Break enough of those patterns, and the soul begins to splinter. That is why the book feels cosmic, while also being intimate. It says the same law that governs the moon should also govern the human will. Not mechanically, not without freedom, but harmoniously. The disaster begins when freedom detaches from harmony and mistakes itself for divinity.
Many readers in our own time do not want that message. We prefer stories where the deepest problem is ignorance. Then the solution is simply better information. Enoch is harder than that. It says the deepest problem is rebellion against rightful measure. Information can intensify that rebellion if the heart remains bent. The Watchers are proof. They knew more than humans. Their greater knowledge did not preserve them. It only widened the radius of their fall. This is one reason the book was always dangerous. not because it contained impossible secrets that institutions wanted hidden, though people love that fantasy. It was dangerous because it attached cosmic seriousness to moral shape. It made power answer to order. It made hidden things answer to record. It made luminous beings answer to obedience. That kind of vision unsettles every era, including ours, because every era contains powers that want brilliance without answerability. The machine analysis of repeated motifs around bowing and trial was especially revealing here. Angels bowing before Enoch, or in later traditions, before the transformed human figure, becomes more than a strange, mystical scene. It becomes a reversal of ancient refusal. Pride will bend. Created splendor will acknowledge what God appoints. The hierarchy of honor will not remain permanently distorted. For communities who told these stories, that was not ornament. It was medicine. They lived in worlds where wrong seemed enthroned. Enoch promised enthronement could be undone. It is moving, too, that the book does not imagine the righteous as those who mastered mysteries, but those who remained clean in a contaminated age. This is a very old kind of heroism, and maybe the one most neglected now. Not the dazzling figure with forbidden access, but the steady one who refuses corruption even when corruption looks sophisticated. The epistle portion especially carries this tone. Live with integrity. Show mercy. Walk humbly. The language becomes almost plain after all the fire and cloud. And perhaps that plainness is the point. After the visions, what remains is conduct. There is a deep kindness in that. Ancient readers did not need only cosmic drama. They needed to know what to do tomorrow morning. How to speak. How to endure. How not to become like those who injure. Enoch gives them stars and judges, but also ethical ground under the feet. Mercy matters. Integrity matters. Pride destroys. Oppression will be answered. Stay faithful while the answer delays. I think that is one reason the Ethiopian tradition held on to the book when so many others let it fall aside. Whatever the historical factors, there is a spiritual logic to the preservation. A people acquainted with continuity, endurance, liturgy, and the long memory of sacred texts may have felt what the book was carrying. Not just speculation. A disciplined hope. A terrible warning. A moral cosmos vast enough to contain both suffering and final restoration. Meanwhile, outside that preserving stream, Enoch lived another life. Quoted but not canonized. Feared. Mined. Romanticized. Sensationalized. Dismissed. Rediscovered. It became one of those border texts that refuse to die because they occupy the exact place where certainty thins and imagination deepens. Too scriptural to ignore. Too unstable to centralize. Too evocative to lose. That borderland gave it a strange afterlife. Scholars returned to it for context. Mystics returned to it for ascent. Conspiracy minds returned to it for giants and hidden princes. Filmmakers returned to it for atmosphere. And now machine readers return to it for pattern. Yet after all those returns, the text is still asking the same thing. What do you do with what descends into your keeping? Do you pass on destruction as technique? Do you turn brilliance into domination? Do you bow where you should bow? Do you remember that every gift can become poison if severed from order? Those are not ancient questions only. They are waiting in every laboratory, every government, every pulpit, every screen lit in the dark. The room is quieter now. The fire has lowered into coals that breathe rather than blaze. You can hear the faint, small sounds that come only when the louder heat is done. A soft settling in the grate. A whisper of air through the chimney. the almost invisible shift of a house at night. This is the right kind of silence for Enoch. Not empty. Listening. In this silence, the old book stops being an argument and becomes a presence. Not because it is beyond critique. It is not. Its history is layered. Its composition composite. Its imagery excessive in places. Its boundaries porous. But none of that empties it of force. Sometimes a composite text preserves reality better than a tidy one, because history itself is composite. Communities gather fragments when trying to survive what overwhelms them. Enoch feels like such a gathering. Fear, hope, astronomy, ethics, revolt, memory, dream. It carries them together because life itself carries them together. And perhaps that is where the AI, for all its power, reaches its limit. It can align phrases, map influence, compare structures, and uncover hidden repetitions with astonishing speed. But it cannot sit in the human ache that gave birth to these visions. It cannot feel what it means to need justice badly enough to imagine books in heaven. It cannot feel the weariness of a people who need stars to be obedient because the earth below them is not. Only the human reader can do that. Only the human listener, lying in dim light with the day slowly fading from the body, can feel how such a text becomes a refuge as much as a warning. Soon we will let the manuscript close completely. One last movement remains. The final turning of the page. The final gathering of all these threads into rest. For now, just let the old names drift more softly. Enoch. Watchers. Nephilim. Uriel. The Son of Man. The Head of Days. Books. Gates. Light. Judgment. Mercy. Let them lose their internet noise and become what they once were. Quiet, heavy words spoken into a world that feared corruption and hoped still for order. And now, the old story begins to settle all the way down, like dust in a beam of late light, like ash softening over a coal that still holds heat inside it. We have followed the watchers downward and the righteous upward. We have watched a human figure carry pleas between worlds. We have listened to the measured movements of sun and moon. We have stood at the edge of canon and exclusion. We have watched modern machines lift old patterns out of hidden alignments and place them before new eyes. Through all of it, one truth has remained quietly intact. The world is not lawless, even when lawlessness appears bright for a while. This may be the deepest comfort the Book of Enoch offers. Not that darkness is unreal. It is painfully real in these pages. Rebellion wounds heaven and earth. Knowledge can deform. Violence can spread. Arrogance can enthrone itself for a season and make humility look weak. Delay can be so long that the faithful begin to wonder whether the books were ever opened at all. Enoch knows all of this. It does not soothe by denial. It soothes by insisting that none of it is final. The machine readers, the linguists, the historians, the coders, all of them looking from different disciplines at the same old pages, ended up brushing against that same conclusion in their own language. The book persists because it binds cosmic scale to moral seriousness without letting either collapse into sentiment. It is large enough for stars and strict enough for mercy. It is imaginative enough for fiery thrones and plain enough to say live justly. It understands that what terrifies the human soul most is not simply pain, but the suspicion that pain is meaningless. Enoch refuses meaninglessness with every line. The fallen watchers themselves become strange teachers by way of their failure. They reveal what happens when beings made for service desire mastery instead. They reveal how quickly admiration turns into contamination when power is severed from reverence. They reveal that intelligence is not innocence. They reveal that beauty can rebel. And perhaps most chilling of all, they reveal that once corruption enters history through instruction, it can begin to feel native. People start calling injury civilization. They decorate it, refine it, defend it, pass it on. But the righteous in Enoch reveal something else. They show that endurance is also transmissible. Mercy is also transmissible. Humility can be inherited too, though it is quieter and often less celebrated. There is a hidden tenderness in the book for those who continue in goodness while surrounded by distortion. These are not usually the loud figures in history. They are often unseen. Yet Enoch places them at the center of the coming restoration. Not the dazzling, but the faithful. Not the boastful, but the clean-hearted. Not those who grasped upward too quickly, but those who waited under pressure without surrendering their shape. That is a difficult hope, and therefore a durable one. Easy hope breaks. Enoch does not offer easy hope. It offers the kind that survives only because it has passed through fire first. The Son of Man, prepared before the world, embodies that hope as judgment embodied. Not revenge without measure. Not wrath as spectacle. A setting right, a revealing, a lifting of what was bent, a bringing low of what swelled itself against truth. We may not be able to settle every historical or theological question around that figure, but we can feel the need that produced him. History requires more than observation. It requires answer. This is why the heavenly books matter so much in the final quiet of the story. They mean that memory is holier than power. They mean that truth has a residence more stable than the shifting archives of rulers. They mean the poor and the hidden are not thrown away simply because earthly record-keeping is corrupt or incomplete. There is something profoundly peaceful in that image once the first terror passes. To be known rightly, to have all pretense fall away, to be relieved at last of distortion. For the cruel, this is dread. For the wounded, it is almost a homecoming. And then the luminaries return one last time in the mind. The doors of heaven. The measured sun, the moon receiving light and then releasing it again. At first, those passages may seem distant from the darker themes of rebellion and judgment. But by the end, they become the very frame of consolation. Creation continues in fidelity. The sky has not learned corruption. The stars do not improvise themselves into ruin. The faithful rhythms of the heavens become a kind of lullaby against the disorder of history. If the cosmos still keeps its courses, then perhaps the soul can also learn to return to right measure. This is why I think the book, for all its storms, is strangely suited to the threshold of sleep. Sleep itself is an act of relinquishment into order. You set aside control. You trust the body to continue its hidden obediences. Breath enters and leaves. The heart keeps time. Dreams rise through doors you do not manage consciously. Morning, if it comes without your command. In that sense, every night asks you to become a little more like the luminaries. To consent to a pattern larger than will. Maybe that is the gentlest answer to the watchers. They seized. They descended grasping. They wanted gift without obedience. Sleep asks the opposite. Release. Rest. Trust. A human being at peace is already a quiet refusal of the old rebellion. It is worth saying plainly, too, that not every modern claim surrounding the book deserves belief. AI can illuminate, but it can also be used theatrically. Hidden message culture often feeds on the ancient appetite for forbidden access. Headlines promise certainty. Clips promise final proof. Voices promise that in one more revelation, all ambiguity will vanish. Enoch itself warns against this hunger more than it feeds it. A wise reader can be grateful for new tools, for translation models, manuscript comparison, statistical analysis, astronomical reconstruction, and still remain wary of any excitement that flatters the ego more than it forms the conscience. That balance matters. Curiosity is good. Wonder is good. Discovery is good. But the old text keeps asking the same sober question. What is this knowledge making of you? More humble? More merciful? More patient? More truthful? Then perhaps it is serving life. More proud? More fevered? More eager to dominate? More delighted by hidden status than by goodness? Then perhaps the watchers smile somewhere in the dark. The later exclusion of Enoch from most canons, when viewed gently, becomes less a conspiracy and more a sign of how uneasy traditions felt in the presence of material this potent. Some of that exclusion may have been wise. Communities need stable centers. Not every electrified vision can become a foundation stone. And yet the preservation of Enoch outside those centers was also wise in another way. Border texts sometimes keep alive the warnings that main roads forget. They stand at the edges and murmur what settled systems no longer know how to say without trembling. So the book remains with us, in that curious border posture, neither fully absent nor fully enthroned, open enough to be rediscovered, dangerous enough to demand caution, rich enough to reward patience, ancient enough to humble every modern certainty that approaches it too quickly. What I think lingers most, after all the debates and all the strangeness, is the image of a human being not swallowed by the age he lived in. Enoch does not conquer the world. He does not build an empire. He is not remembered for military brilliance or architectural genius. He walks with God. That is the phrase that survives from the older scripture, simple and almost fragile. Walked with God. The later book surrounds that sentence with storms of vision, but perhaps the center remains the same. To walk rightly in a distorted world is already a miracle greater than spectacle. If you were to carry only one thing from this long night of watchers, prince, giant offspring, celestial gates, heavenly books, excluded scriptures, and machine-decoded patterns, maybe it should be that. Walk rightly. Keep mercy near. Do not envy corrupt brilliance. Do not panic at delay.
Do not mistake hiddenness for absence. The books are not hurried, but they are not empty. Outside this room, the world goes on in its restless way. Networks hum. Screens glow. Data moves like weather through distant servers. Somewhere an algorithm is comparing old lines against older lines, discovering one more buried correspondence no monk could have tracked alone. Somewhere a scholar leans over a manuscript image and feels a little thrill at a phrase becoming clearer. Somewhere, someone frightened by the age we live in opens Enoch looking for a sensational secret and instead finds a stern kind of comfort. Somewhere someone else dismisses the whole thing and still cannot quite shake the image of records kept beyond the reach of spin. That is how old books live. Not by forcing belief, but by planting images that continue to work in people long after the page is shut. The fire is nearly done now. The room feels softer because of it. The shadows no longer look sharp, only deep. A last thread of warmth rises from the grate. The candle beside us has become a small rounded glow. You can imagine the ancient manuscript finally being closed. Not slammed, not hidden, just closed with the care given to something that has been difficult and faithful at the same time. The cover settles. The page edges whisper once and become still. The watchers remain in their chains. The giant violence has passed into warning. The Son of Man remains where judgment belongs. The moon continues her borrowed shining. The sun keeps his doors. The books stay open where they have always been. And the human listener, here at the end of a long and haunted story, is left not with panic, but with order slowly returning to the body. Let your breathing follow that order now. Slow, and then slower. Let the mind stop trying to solve every line. Ancient texts do not have to be mastered to be felt. Let the phrases drift apart and become only impressions. High gates, quiet stars, a patient judge, a dim room, dust in old margins, the faint sound of turning pages far away, a sky that has not forgotten its path. Nothing more is required tonight. The old mysteries can keep their remaining shadows. The machines can keep searching. The scholars can keep debating. The heavens can keep their measures. You can rest. And if the Book of Enoch is trying to tell us anything still, after all these centuries, perhaps it is simply this: that the world is deeper than corruption, that memory is stronger than power, that pride is never finally bright enough to outshine truth, and that beyond the noise of every age, there remains a quieter order, waiting to gather the weary back into peace. There is one more image worth keeping close before sleep takes you. Not the watchers in their descent, not the giant suns, not the abyss, not even the books. A simpler image, a solitary figure under a sky that seems too large, still choosing not to join the age in its madness. That may be the true miracle in Enoch. Not that heaven opened, but that fidelity remained possible while the world beneath it grew loud with ruin. Ancient readers needed that image because they lived under pressure. We need it too. Every age tells the soul that compromise is maturity, that reverence is weakness, that moral patience is for the naive. Enoch answers with a quieter certainty. No. The one who walks steadily may look small, but he is aligned with what lasts. And maybe that is the final reason the text survived every attempt to push it outward. It keeps telling the human heart that scale is deceptive. The violent look enormous. The bright rebels look impressive. The empires look permanent. The hidden books look abstract. But time belongs not to what swells quickest. It belongs to what remains rightly ordered. The moon does not compete with the sun. The stars do not scramble for one another's places. The righteous do not need to become monstrous in order to endure. There is rest in that thought. Rest from the exhausting lie that survival always requires becoming like the thing that frightens you. If the newest AI tools have done anything of lasting value here, perhaps it is this: they have not really given us a new gospel of secrets. They have simply made it harder to ignore how carefully the old text was built, how consistently it returns to the same severe mercy, how stubbornly it resists being reduced to only monsters or only codes. Underneath the dramatic surface, the message is painfully human. Corruption spreads through imitation. Judgment requires truth. Knowledge without humility destroys. Endurance matters. Mercy matters. Order is real, even when hidden. That is enough for one night. More than enough. The manuscript can sleep. The machines can go quiet. The arguments can rest where they are. And you can let the ancient unease loosen its hand from your chest, because the story has already done what it came to do. It has told you that the darkness is real, but not ultimate. It has told you that hidden things are seen. It has told you that the heavens are not confused. It has told you that your own small faithfulness belongs to a pattern older than fear. So let the room fade now. Let the edges of the story soften until they are only warmth and shadow and a sense of vastness held in order. Let the old names drift out beyond the curtain of thought. Let the fire become only a red hush. Let the final page close within you without effort, and rest inside the quiet certainty that no true light ever loses its way. Good night.